Hello, everyone. Hope you all are doing great. First of all, thank you for tuning in with Recro. Myself, Ankita, I'm working as a software engineer at Swiggy, and I'm also a part of Recro, which is a developer focused organization. And we are trying our level best every day to connect talented developers with the fast growing startups like Dunzo, Swiggy, CureFit, Uran, and a lot more similar startups. Today, we have Faisal Rashid with us, who will be giving us a talk on demystifying CSS. He's a software engineer working as a full stack web developer at DealerSocket. And in this session, he'll be covering the basic building blocks of CSS and why do we have so much trouble applying CSS styles and how one can affect the other, the different design patterns that we have in CSS and the latest trends, etc. So before I hand over the mic to Faisal, I'd like to give you guys a walkthrough of the platform that we are using. So for this session, we are using AirMeet. On all your screens, on right pane, there's a list of items that you can see. First would be the sessions. So sessions is the breakdown of this talk. So we have break down this particular webinar into three sections. First one would be the presentation, the PPT that Fazil has prepared for us. Then will be a very exciting live coding session. And in the end, we'll be taking all the Q&As. You'll find another option, raise hand. So the purpose of this particular feature is to enable any one of you to speak in between the webinar or the presentation because we will be taking a Q&A session, but if you feel like that it's really important for you to clarify a doubt before moving ahead with the session, or you'd like to pitch in at a later point, like when we are having the Q&A and like you would like to add up some points, then you can raise your hand and I, being the host, can allow you to speak up, and it'll be completely up to you guys if you want to share your video as well. Next is the chat section where you guys can chat with each other, with me or with Fazil as well. And there we'll be using this section to share our social links, our Instagram handle, our YouTube link, and Fazil's LinkedIn profile, mine as well, and all the necessary links. This will also include the presentation that Faisal has prepared, as well as we'll also share the code with you so that it can help you like improve your skills also. So then is the last one, which is the question section. So you can post your questions, all your questions in this section only, because we'll be taking all the questions only from this section, not from any other section, like not from the chat section. And since we have divided this talk into multiple sessions, but I really request you to only post all your questions in the welcome session itself so that we do not miss any of the questions. And one more very important thing, that if we find you guys writing or posting something inappropriate, then you can be reported as well. So action can also be taken against that particular inappropriate action. So now I'd like to hand over the mic to Faisal.
Hey, thanks a lot, Ankita. Like Ankita said, guys, I'm Faisal Rashid. I'm working as a full stack developer in DealerSocket. I've been working as a software engineer for almost 3.5 years now, and work on JavaScript, .NET. So that stack combined with all the web technologies, React and all. So today, that's enough about me. So today we'll be speaking on CSS. I just want to give you guys a heads up what it's going to be about. Ankita listed the points correctly, and so this is going to be for beginners, complete beginners. If you have worked with HTML, CSS before a little, that would be awesome because that will help definitely. And today we'll be trying to uncover why CSS is a neglected commodity, at least in uh, the exposure that I have had with developers. I see that it's kind of a neglected item that you think, hey, it comes, we'll get it done. So we'll try to demystify that. Why is that? And try to get the basics right. And if we can get basics right of CSS, uh, I think we can progress as web developers, all of us. So I'll start sharing my screen now. I hope you can see my first slide by now. All right, cool. So CSS demystified. It's a small pun on CSS is awesome. That you guys. I hope you don't mind me looking at this screen while I do the presentation. So a pun on CSS that CSS is awesome, but the person who designed this box couldn't fit awesome in the box. So let's get started. So the thing that we want to do, we want to answer some questions, and that's what we will be doing throughout this presentation. We'll be trying to answer what CSS is, why you as a developer should know CSS, and what are its basic building blocks. And the age-old important question, why is it so difficult to apply CSS? And what are some of the daily challenges that you face while applying CSS? Um, and then we will dive into some trends in CSS, right? It's not just any more div and you apply some styles to a div. It has become much more than that. And something we will talk about frameworks in CSS. Like every technology these days has a framework to support it. CSS has two. So I will talk about these. We'll try to cover each one of these items in the forthcoming slides. So first and foremost, what CSS is, sorry, it's an acronym for cascading style sheets. So CSS. So what is cascading? What are style sheets? We'll talk about that in a bit. By definition, it's a domain-specific language. It's not a programming language, although I would like it to be. It's a DSL, and it allows you to style your web pages. The crux of CSS is this. It allows you to style your web pages, that's it. And it allows you to program the layout of your web pages, how your web pages are laid out, right? What goes where. You do that using CSS. So that is what CSS is. Once we got that out of the way, we try to understand the why of it, right? So why can't I go by with my day-to-day life without knowing CSS? I know CSS. Why do I need to know it in detail, or why do I need to know each and every basic of the basics of CSS? So let's try to answer those questions first. So first and foremost, as a web developer, if you're a front-end developer or you are a full-stack web developer, you need to know CSS. It's your job. If you don't know CSS and you have these two roles, I need to talk to your manager because you're not doing your job well. Yes, just kidding. So it gives you more control over the UI. This one is very, very, very important. If you know CSS and you know it well, you have this control over the UI. So you can play with elements, you can play with different panels of your UI, if you want to call them, different nodes. You can put a box anywhere, you can move your div as and how you like. And that's important while designing layouts. And when you have UI problems, right? So let's say you have been asked to design a navigation bar, or you have been asked to design the admin dashboard for your website, right? For your web application, and you don't know where to start from, and you end up using templates or frameworks that you ideally wouldn't use. So CSS helps you navigate those problems more efficiently, right? So similarly, this one is debatable. Some people say that I don't know. I don't know about this whether JavaScript is more efficient or CSS. But one thing is for certain: if you know CSS and you have a UI problem, you end up writing less JavaScript to solve that problem. So that boosts your website's efficiency. Absolutely does, because someone said the fastest JavaScript that you can write is the one that you don't write. Right? If you can avoid writing JavaScript, that's how you make your website more performant. And similarly, Yes, some let's say CSS animations versus JavaScript animations, or CSS animations faster, JavaScript animations faster. It's up for debate. But your website will be more efficient and more performant if you use CSS rather than JavaScript for problems that can be solved using CSS. So going further, now once we have all that out of the way, we know now that I hope all of you agree now that yes, you should know CSS, should be good at it. Uh, let's dive into it, right? What is CSS? How do I learn CSS, or what do I need to know about CSS? So one thing, I try to structure it as well as possible. Some people may not agree with how I structure the building blocks of CSS, but that's fine. It's subjective, right? So the first thing that I want to talk about is how do I apply CSS to some element, right? I have HTML. I have a page. It has 4 boxes. How do I apply CSS to one of the boxes, right? That's where the first block of CSS that I like to think of is selectors. How do you select what to style? Okay, so for this we will like this marks the end of our welcome session if you guys are interested. So now I will try to dive into the code. I just wanted to get everything else out of the way so that we can write some code. How do I style my document? So let me quickly jump to my other desktop. uh, I hope everyone can see by now. um, all right, if you can't see, just post a message in the chat, or if it's blurry or something, just let me know. So this is a basic document that says, oh, you shouldn't be here. Sorry about that. The basic document that says hello. Uh, People go with hello world. I don't know why I went with hello. So as you can see, this is a preview of this document. Hello. So now what I want to do is I want to apply CSS to this hello, or let's call it, I want to style this, right? This little hello. I want the text to be red. So those of you who know basic HTML, let me put this hello inside a paragraph. Okay. So by the way, post any question you like. Doesn't matter. Uh, don't worry about level here, as if it's in beginner level, that's fine. So what I want to do with this hello is I want to make it red. How do I apply style to it? So one way of adding style to this hello is inline. So what we use is an attribute called style, and then we say whatever style. Let's say we want color to be red, and save it. I hope you can see that this text is red. So that's one way of applying styles. Another thing that I want to do this text is have a background. So let's say a background color of aqua. So it has a background color of aqua. Similarly, I can do a bunch of styles. I can apply a bunch of styles to this HTML paragraph that I have here. And one way that I applied these styles to it was using an inline style, as you can see here. Another way to get rid of this for now, another way of adding styles is using a style tag. So usually it's done in the head of the HTML document. Strongly recommend to do it in the head of HTML document. Otherwise, it can work anywhere. So, but head. Let's go. So now the important bit. Here it was easy to apply a style to this because I could go into the attributes and add a style. How do I now know I need to apply a style to this paragraph? For that, I use selectors. Now, a selector is simple. I say P. This is an element selector. And now I can apply styles to this paragraph, this P. I'll apply the same style. I say color should be red and background color should be aqua. When I save this, same style applied to this and using a selector. Yay. Simple, right? The, now we have covered the second way of applying styles, the third way, and I would say most preferred way because different ways of applying styles are warranted in different circumstances. But in this demo, we'll be following the third way of applying styles using a style sheet. For that, you need to create a file. Let's say I create a new file here. By the way, I'm using a VS Code IDE here. If anyone is interested in index.css. What I have done, I have created an external file and split it down, close this. Okay. This here I can apply a style, right? I can say color red and background color aqua. Notice nothing happened. I have it on live reload, but nothing happened. It didn't apply these styles. The problem is that my HTML file doesn't know about these styles. I never told my HTML file to look for this index.css file. So I do that using link. This is another HTML tag that you can use. I use an rel of style sheet. I have to specify what this is because a link can refer to various kinds of elements. And I use a relative path to my file. Since it's in the same folder, I say index.css. And voila, I see the color on hello. Still don't know why I'm not calling this hello world. That's fine. So three ways of applying styles: using a style sheet, or using a simple inline style, or using a style tag inside your HTML file. Now, the thing that we learned here was that we used a paragraph tag um, to select this paragraph, right? But this is a very general tag, right? It will, if I end up creating another paragraph, I call this hello again. Let's save this. Even this hello again has the same style, which I, in most circumstances, may not want. So how do I apply style to different paragraphs differently? We will go into our second type of selector, a class selector. Let me give this a class attribute. I'll call it first para. Okay. So then I go here into my selector. I don't select every paragraph now. I select a class. Notation for that is dot first para, control S, and that didn't do anything. Yeah, it did. So to apply the style to this, just to this hello. I know this is very basic that I'm showing here, but bear with me. We'll get to the good part. So just want to get these out of the way as soon as possible. Now I can apply a class to this also and give it different styles. That's doable. But I want to use another selector here just to get an understanding of another, which is an ID selector. I call it second pair. How do you select this ID? Is using a pound or a hash and second para, and I say color should be blue and background color should be gray, and that should work. Yes, it did. Oh, that's a bad choice of color. As you can see, I selected this para using this ID selector. So that's how you select elements to style, because when you say I want to style my document using CSS, you need to know how to select parts of my document to style. Now, we're going to deep dive into various types of selectors here, right? Not just para and second para and things like that. So let me create a division, a div here, and I create a paragraph here that says first div. And if I save this, I should see a first div somewhere. Yeah, yeah. So I see the first div. Now what I want to do is, I want to select this first div, and let's say I have another another div here that has another para, and that's a second inside div. Okay. Let's say I only want to select this first div, and I'm not going to apply any style to any class to it or anything, but I still want to select it. It's a selector that we are going to use. It's div color. So this is called a child selector, parent-child relationship. What it's going to do is it's going to select the first div, not first div, a paragraph that is directly a child of a div, right? So here it's going to select both these divs. So that was a first choice of div. So I'm going to use a class of top div and call this. Save this. You will notice, hopefully, that this is blue. I hope this is visible. Let's give it. So you notice that this div has become cyan color. That is because of this child, direct child selector. Similarly, we have a bunch of selectors, right? So let's say a top div and page. This is the space selector, and it selects every paragraph that's inside this top div. Okay, so if I get rid of this and I say color of yellow, yeah, so both these have color of yellow, which again is four choice of color. I hope this is more visible. First div and second div both have this light blue color. So we covered a class selector, a ID selector, a child selector. Another selector is selecting everything inside. I like to call it find selector. I don't know what the name for it is. So these are all selectors that get you what you want. There are too many selectors to select from, all right? So there is a sibling selector. I'm just trying to give you a taste of what's possible, okay? So you have sibling selectors, you have pseudo elements, pseudo classes, which I will try to cover later. Those can also be considered as selectors, and many ways of selecting an element. So CSS is quite powerful that way. Of if you want to select something, how do you do it? So I hope that gave you some idea of it, and we can go forward. So the second thing that I want to talk about is the box model, the big mystery. So if you go to any CSS meet or any CSS session or any CSS lesson, usually the first thing that they speak of is the box model. Can you please give an example of sibling selectors as well? Sure, sure, why not? Uh, okay, we can do that in one of the other demos if that's okay, because I'm going to use that hopefully. So I will give an example of a sibling selector. So for now, I have made a note of this question. We will talk about those. So for now, let's go towards the box model. What is the box model? So to explain box model, I tried to create kind of an illustration, then I couldn't create an illustration. So I said, what's the best way of teaching a box model by actually building a box model? So in CSS, everything is a box, okay? So as evident here, right? This is a box, not a square, a rectangle, obviously. So everything is a box, but what is the box model? What are we speaking of here? So let's take an example, right? So I have built this little HTML and let's close this box model, and I hope this is visible. Okay, cool. explain box model. Let's go to this particular file, see if we can open it. All right, cool. So what we have here is a div that has a class of box model, and I have selected this div here. How I got in the center of the screen, how did I solve that is something that I don't know if we will cover, but just for illustration, it's at the center of screen using some CSS property. But what's important is that it is a box that has a height of 400 pixels and a width of 400 pixels and a background of purple. Yeah, that is the main point here. So what I am going to do is try to illustrate what the box model is. Right now it's 400 pixels by 400 pixels and it has a background color of purple. It's just that. That's the div. So what I'm going to do is give it some content. So for content, I will take an image of SRC. I have an image here of a deer, I guess. Yes. So if I save this, you see this deer. Brilliant there, I guess. So I gave this some content. It's still 400 pixels by 400 pixels because this is the content still of this box model div. All right. What I'm going to do is I am going to give it some padding. What is padding? It's the distance between the outer edge of your CSS element, or sorry, your HTML element and its content. So I'm going to give this a padding of, let's say, 30 pixels. Now you see, we're going to create kind of a frame for this deer picture. You see, its content is still 400 by 400. We just added a padding. This was still my div, purple color div. So we added a padding of 30 pixels. And this padding you see here, that distance between the outer edge of the div and its content is exactly 30 pixels all around. Second thing I'm going to add is a border. Let's add a border of, let's say, 20 pixels solid, and we do like red, I guess. Add border. Now this gives me a border around my div. I still have my purple div. Its content is still image of a deer, and it has a border of 20 pixels, and it's red. Now I'm actually trying to build to what the box model actually is. So next I'm going to give it a margin. Margin is the distance that is between the outer edge of your HTML element and the next element. Okay, be it above it, below it, to the right of it, to the left of it. Okay, it's a distance that your HTML element maintains from other elements. So I'm going to give it a margin of 40 pixels, and it will be visible. Margins are not visible. So how is this visible? Again, I have used a couple of, see this container here, so I've used that just to illustrate what margin is, but this is exactly 40 pixels here. Let's change it to 50 and it will be exactly 50. What the box model is, it says that each HTML element has content, which is this image of the deer. It has a padding, which is this purple that you see here, the distance between the outer edge of your HTML element and its content. It has a border, which you see in color red, and it has a margin, which you see in color green. It's actually some green, light green, I don't know which green. That's the box model. Every HTML element has these. Now you can set their value to 0, that's fine, but it will have its margin set to 0, it's fine, but it will have a margin. It will have a border and it will have a padding. So it's really simple. So actual element that you see here, this box model that I created, its width and height are currently this 400 that was actual width and height, plus this padding plus this border. That's its width. That's its calculated width. So that, which in this case will be 400 plus 30 padding on either side, that's 460, and 20 border on each side, which is 500. Which I can show you here if I open DevTools. You see that? That's 500 by 500. So why is this important? Why am I going through the box model? Because this helps you solve many problems, right? When you know the basics of each element, how it's built, you know how to navigate a problem. And one more thing I want to add here is that each box in HTML, or call it CSS, is a content box. By content box, we mean that its width is the width that you specify here, the width and height is the height and width of its content. There is another box sizing available in CSS, and we call it border box. Some of you may know about it. When you say border box, you specify that, hey, the height and width that I specified here is actually the height and width up until the border, including the border. Okay, so if I save this, you see, now the width of my div is that this 400 and height 400 is calculated including the border. You might notice that the picture got smaller. And if we actually jump in and say its height and width is in fact 400 pixels. Again, I cannot stress this enough how important it is to understand what the box model is, because trust me, it helps you navigate problems a lot, really a lot. Okay, so I hope everyone got that. If there are any questions, please post them away. And oh, green is not specified anywhere when composing the name of a selector. Okay, I see three questions. If it's okay, I'll answer those. So the first one that I see is it common practice to use an underscore when composing the name of a selector? Uh, it's fine, Ankita, that we can answer these, right? I see a
Yeah,
lot of
sure. Not a problem.
upvotes on this.
Up to you. But also,
Okay, awesome.
once
So the
you're
first
done,
question that I see, mhm,
actually, we also have a raise hand request. But since you have already read out the first question, we can cover this one first, and then we'll give the mic to you. Okay. Uh, the
okay, cool.
request is gone now. Okay, let's.
All right, cool. So the question is it common practice to use an underscore when composing the name of a selector? Uh, it's up to you, right? Uh, I prefer a dash when I'm composing the name of a selector. When we try to go into the design patterns or the style guides of using CSS, uh, there will be some style guides. For example, there is BEM style guide or there is Max style guide. So BEM is really all about underscores, double underscores while naming your selectors. But it's a style guide, right? It's a pattern that you can follow. It's a guideline. Similarly, is it so to answer your question, it's up to preference if you use a dash, if you use an underscore. And with the advent of JavaScript these days and JSS, people cannot anymore. I miss using dash because JSS allows you but really doesn't if you know what I'm speaking of. But it's up to your preference if you want to do a dash or an underscore. I have seen people prefer underscore. I have people prefer sorry I've seen people prefer camel case selectors. It's really up to you. I hope that answers your question. How the margin is green here? Yes, good question. Um, Green is not specified anywhere. See, I hate a bunch of CSS. Okay, you see this. We just saw this parent-child selector, right? The parent is container, its child is this div. See here, and its background is yellow green. So like I said, this margin is something that keeps you away from the rest of the HTML, right? So this box here that we see, this box model is trying to create a buffer around it of 30 pixels. And since that buffer is of color yellow green, told it wasn't green, you are seeing this green color here. I will share this source code once we are done. And how I got it at the center, which is not a question. How is margin and padding getting color? Okay, I hope margin was answered by this. And how is padding getting color? Padding is getting color because it's still, okay, cool. Let me explain. So this box model that you see is of color purple, this color, right? So if I, let's say, if I get rid of this deer and save it, this is my box model. And the picture of the image of deer here is actually padded by 30 pixels. So this box model has a padding of 30 pixels. That's why the deer picture is 30 pixels within this box model on each side. So this purple color that you see here is actually the color of this box model, the background color. I hope that answers your question. If it doesn't, raise your hand. Okay, cool. Thank you. Okay, so if we had box model out of the way, oh, there was one more thing that I wanted to show here. Uh, let's go.
Sorry, Faisal. We have a
Yes.
raise hand request from Shailesh Sharma. So I'll hand over the mic to him.
Awesome.
Fine?
Yes, please.
Okay. Shailesh, could you please be louder?
Okay, Faisal, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, Shailesh. How
So,
are you?
my question is earlier you showed the picture of the deer was of 400 pixel, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, and at the end of the completing the script, you showed that the box model, including the margin and padding, it
Mm-hmm.
contains the 400 cross 400 rather than
Yes.
it should be 500 cross 500. So it is
Yes.
so what is happening here? Is it shrinking the actual content?
All right. All right. I got your question. It is not in fact shrinking the actual content. So this 400 by 400 that you see here has only been specified for this box model. Okay, let me close. For this box model. If you look at all the other CSS, there really isn't any pixel stated anywhere. What we're saying is that this image that you see here of the stair, it has a height of 100% and a width of 100%. By that we mean that whatever its container is allowing it to have a height of, it will take that, and whatever the container is allowing a width of, it will take that. So since the container is saying that, hey, I can only have a height of 400 pixels and a width of 400 pixels, you will have to adjust. So this image will have a height and width, whichever is allowed by its container. That's why you don't see any skewed images or anything here. It's just that we are only this container, this box model is dictating the height and the width. So all the other items, all the other divs or elements will have to adjust accordingly.
Okay.
Does that answer your question, Shailesh?
Yes. Yes.
Awesome.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Is that all, Shailesh?
Yes. Thanks, Ankita.
Awesome.
I'll withdraw the mic now. Thank you.
Okay, cool. So so what I wanted to show another thing is, let's go back to our index.html now, which is this brilliant little page that has no colors, which can be seen. And I will just open this index now. No, no, not you. This one. Cool. So what I want to really speak of is the one of another other basics that kind of comes into box model but really doesn't. But I just want to fit it in there really quickly. Is block level and inline elements. So what are block level? Because I have seen a lot of people struggle with block and inline. So what these really are, if you notice this paragraph that I created here, it took all the width and no one asked me why. I think everyone knows here. The reason it took all the width, even though I didn't specify any width, and I can prove that I didn't specify any width here. I have never not written width anywhere, but it still just went ahead and took the whole width here. because when I specify, it's because paragraph is a block level element. So what block level elements are, they take up all the width that's available to them. By default, a div is a block level element, a paragraph is a block level element. So how they differ from what's another alternative? It's inline elements. So inline elements only take up the space that is required for them, right? So for example, you have your images; those are inline. You have your anchor tags; those are inline elements, and this can be specified even, right? So if I go into this first para and I say that, hey, your display is blocked by default, but I want it to be inline. See, it no longer takes the full width, right? That is because we just specified it to be inline. Second thing, second thing I want to, before I go into this, is even if I specify its width to be, let's say, 200 pixels, save, it will become 200 pixels. And the second para that I specify its width to be 200 pixels also. So I would assume that, hey, since the screen is wide enough, the second paragraph should come here because the width is 200 pixels. But that doesn't happen because this width has something to do with all the background colors and margins and everything. Sorry, all the borders that you have, but it's still a block level element. It's still going to take up the whole width. Uh, if I quickly inspect this element, you see it's still taking the whole width, as is this. How can I get them side by side is by using something that we call a display inline. If I do change its property to display inline, and same thing for this. See, they are side by side again. That is the difference between inline and block elements. There is one drawback with inline styles though, they cannot take a width and they have like, not so sure, they cannot take a padding top or margin top. So even if I say like width 200 pixels, you would assume it would give it width of 200 pixels. It didn't do anything. They still take up as much space as required. So an alternative, it would be an inline block, which would in fact take 200 pixel width, right? Sorry. So this wall knowing why an inline style doesn't take a width, why I did need to use an inline block, would have taken a couple of Google searches, right? At least. So that's why we need to know CSS. We need to know the basics. So this would be a basic part, right? It would come under basics, knowing what an inline element is, what an inline block element is, what a block is. By the way, there's a bunch of values that you can put in display. You can use flex, you can use inline flex, you can use flex box, you can use table. That is actually the table display property for table is table. Similarly, there's a bunch. So yeah, I kind of thought it was important to mention block and inline elements because I have seen people struggle with these. I've seen people struggle to put divs side by side. Since Flex came, everything became simpler, which we will talk about in a bit, but hope that was helpful. I think we have a question, do we? So inline will be default take the length of the text. Yes, it does. So inlines are your links usually, right? So it will by default take whatever width is required, and inline block you can specify width. There are I think a number of differences between inline and inline block. Like margin top, you can have only for inline block, margin bottom, similarly padding top, padding bottom, you can only have for inline block, not for an inline element. Even though you provide it, it won't affect anything. So yes, by default it will. Third and the first word of CSS, cascading, inheritance and cascading. So, like I have stated here, it's probably the answer to your question, why are my CSS styles not applying? What is causing them to be overridden? Or what happened to my style? So, we'll try to do a quick, using code, we'll try to understand what inheritance is, what cascading is. So I have a whole bunch of slides for this. First of all, uh, what is inheritance? So inheritance means that your styles get applied from your parent to your children. What does that mean? Quickly jumping to our demo here. So okay, I don't like these. No, let's create new file. Let's create a file called inheritance.html, and let's also create a CSS file. Inside our HTML file, let's quickly this is a quick snippet that we have for showing this meta, and I will quickly link to that style sheet. Oh, we're there. Right. So yes, I will answer that question about important in a bit. So let's say I have a div that contains, again, hey, that's not a div, contains a paragraph, and that paragraph says hello world. Finally, we got the hello world. So this is simple, right? And I want this to be color red. What I'm going to do is I'm going to set a style to the div and say, hey, the div should be color red. But magically, that style applies to this paragraph as well. I never said the paragraph should be red. I said the div should be red. That's inheritance. So styles get passed down from parents to children to their children to their children to their children, unless and until there is more specific style that should be applied. So if I say that, you know what, the P should have a color of color, violet, and it will be violet, right? So unless and until stated otherwise, an element will take the style of its parent. That is inheritance. So when you see some styles being applied to your element and you go into your dev tools, those of you who do that, you see that, hey, this style was applied to that element, and because of that element, it's coming to this element. That's because inheritance. So it probably was inherited from that element to this element. So there's not much, a lot about inheritance other than this. So, and one more thing, unless and until a particular property is overridden by some more specific style, it will apply. By that I mean, if I say here background color should be blue, we'll still have a background color blue because no one said state none other style that we applied stated otherwise. Okay. There are a bunch of questions on inline. We'll get to those. So it's per particular CSS property that we see these being overridden from parent to child. Another more important thing that we're going to talk about is cascading, right? If we have this out of the way, inheritance. What does cascading mean? Cascading means, so let's take this example, right? We saw, so when your browser processes your CSS and it targets a particular element, let's say it went into this paragraph, it has to apply styles to it. It will create a list of all the styles that have been specified for this paragraph. In this case, those will be color red, background color blue, and color violet. Now it will have conflicting styles, right? So we have a color red and a color violet. Which one does it apply? So the cascading effect is that the more specific your style is, more precedence it takes. What do I mean by that? Let me give you an example again. So one rule of cascading, by the way, this is what we call specificity, which I'm trying to get into. Let's say I put a P of red and a background color of blue and the color violet. Which one of these will be applied? The one which came last, because they have exactly same selector. Whichever one came last will be applied. You see this color is violet still. I hope you can see. It is violet, by the way. Or I should use green so that it's more different. No, no, that did not help. What about white? Yes, white helped. So its color is white, not red. The reason because this came last, right? Whichever style came last will take precedence. Second thing, which one is more specific, right? So specificity, if we speak of, which I am going to speak of here, is more specific a style, more precedence it will take. Because when your browser processes CSS, like I said, there's a cascading effect, right? One style falls into another, and whichever one is more specific takes precedence. And if we want to understand how do we go about specificity, sorry, how does the browser decide which takes precedence? There is an order to it, okay? So there are inline styles which always take the highest precedence. Then sorry, these are followed by IDs, then classes or pseudo classes and attributes, then last pseudo elements and elements. What does this mean? I will explain in the same example. So starting with inline styles, okay. So let's say I put an inline style here which says color black, and did not apply for some reason. Oh, this is not style spray. It became black. Believe me, it did. So the precedence order was, so the browser looked and saw, hey, there is a style which says black, and it's inline style. Although there are more colors specified in some other places, but this will take precedence because it's the inline style. So the first preference always goes to the inline style. Second is, if I get rid of this inline style, is IDs. Now, how do I illustrate that? Let's say I get rid of this, both of these, and I say, you know what? I'm going to give this an ID and a class. ID is para, class is para class. We say that the para should have a color of red, and this says, you know what? Para class should have a color of blue, right? So by law of specificity, although this style did come in last, this ID style will take precedence. Okay, so if I save it, you'll see the color is red and not blue because ID comes first. Remember, let's go back to this. First inline styles, then IDs and classes, pseudo classes, then attributes, and then elements and pseudo elements. So this took precedence. Let me show you something much more cynical or something. Class. Okay, we did not talk about the selector. By the way, this selector is self-selector. Okay, so it says when you remember that space selector, right? Whatever is inside this. By this we mean when we use the same selector without a space, it means okay, find a paragraph that and find some element that has an ID of this and a class of this. This means and. Okay, and there is no space. This doesn't always work, okay? No, I don't mean it doesn't always work, but there has to be a way that you use it. You cannot say something like class B, because then it will say, hey, this is the class name should be class B. If you want to use it like that, use it like this, b.paraclass, a paragraph that has a style of paraclass. Going back to what we had, if I say now, okay, the color should be green, say it's light. light sea green. Yeah, it is light sea green right now. So what happened here is that specificity can be compounded. By that I mean it adds. All right. So this had, let's do something. Let's create. Okay, where do I put it? I don't have a notepad, so I'll do it here. Let's say inline, which we are not going to use. Say ID, class, and element. Okay. So if you look at this first one, you see that its ID, it has one ID, so its score will be 100 because it has zero classes and zero elements specified in the selector. The selector is just one ID, so it gets one. If you look at the second, it has zero IDs in the selector and it has one class in the selector and it has zero elements in the selector. Similarly, if you go to the last, it has one ID in the selector, one class in the selector, and zero elements. Here. Which one gets applied? One which has the highest number. So this is 100, which is more than 10, but less than 110. So that's how this selector got applied. That's how specificity works. So when I showed you this slide, you could say, you could put numbers under these and see which one is more specific that way. I hope that was understandable. Okay, now I want to write another style here. So let's say I don't want this color and I cannot override this color. How do I do that? I need to make my style more specific. Let's say I want the color to be, is there a dark yellow? No, there is no dark yellow. Dark magenta, okay? So this will override that one, right? This will definitely override this because they have the same specificity and this came last. Let's say I cannot put it last, I can only put it here, but I still want to make it more specific than that. I will use a P here, a paragraph that has an ID of this and so this. Okay, forget this, don't forget this. So this, you see, it has a color of magenta now because this became more specific. If we look at this now, this has one div, one class, and one element, that P. Its specificity is now 111, and this is the style that will get applied. Do we have any questions on this? Oh, someone asked about important. Sorry, important is an, what do we call that? It's kind of a hack, right? If I make this, I say, you know what? This is important. Right now, it doesn't matter. It overrides all specificity. That's why I am about to go into why not use important. So if, let's say, you want to apply a style and you're not able to, that's when you use important, right? Someone is overriding your style somehow, something has more specificity than you use important. There is always a better way. So if, let's say, this is, see, I cannot go over this specificity, right? I'm done here. I cannot go beyond this. But I still want to override this style. So one way would be use important and be done with it. But the problem is that no one can then override the important. So how do I do it? There are always hacks. So I can say a paragraph that has an ID of para and a class of para class and a class of para class. I can use this twice, doesn't matter, right? Now this will override. I have these two styles here, right? And I want this color to be, I'm running out of colors. This one, whatever this is, okay. And I want this color to be this. This will take precedence now. This is this color, I hope. Yeah, this color. This will take precedence. That's how you hack specificity. I have done this like a million times because sometimes you're using a framework and that framework has a style that's overriding your style. Use a hack, make it more specific. I hope that answers the question about important. Yes, it is bad practice to use important unless and until it's very, very important to use it. No pun intended. All right, if there are no questions on specificity, I hope I covered it. Yeah, cool. Okay, personally, I feel specificity is more important than the box model to understand in CSS because if you know specificity, you can override styles like anything. All right. Um, I have a bunch of slides to go through. I hope if there's time, you can just let me know, Ankita.
Sure.
All right, thank you. Okay, after we're done with specificity, I hope we are. So, by the way, before I jump forward, this is why we have trouble applying CSS because we don't know about inheritance sometimes and we don't know about specificity. We have trouble overriding styles. We see styles overriding our styles and we don't know what to do about it. And then we jump to important. So, yeah, I hope that answered your question. Going to the next slide, I promised that I would talk about some common CSS problems that we face and how to tackle those problems. Excuse me. So if we go to the first problem, it is how do we create and manage layouts, right? So what do I mean by that? Let's say you have a brand new project, you have to create this website that needs to have different panes, different columns, different sections. It can get a little troubling. It can get a little out of hand. So how do we do that? How do we manage those? I would suggest that if we are trying to create layouts, you need to use technologies in CSS that actually enable you to create layouts. By that, I mean use a flex or a grid. I won't go into grid because even I don't understand grid as much as I would like. So, but it is being adopted a lot. People are going towards grid. I will talk about flex, which is very, very helpful when you are trying to style stuff. Okay. So let's jump right in. Okay. So let's get rid of these two files and let's say someone asked you to create a navigation bar. Okay. Let's create a file. Uh, now, and let's create another file. Call it nav.css. And as usual, this will go down. This will be closed. This will have an HTML file, and this will have a nav.css. Say you have to create a navigation item. Okay, just want to illustrate how easy it is to navigate between these. Between the layout problems once you have a command over CSS. Oh, so let's say I have to create a navigation bar at the top of my file. I put it in nav and I create a UL, bunch of li's that says home, and it says about, it says photos, it says blog, and another one like projects. And last but not the least, contacts. If I save this, this is what I'm left with. Okay, so I need to create a layout after this. I need to create a nav bar after it. Now, I would just want to showcase the power of flex. That's what my original idea here is. So let's say, first of all, let me give this, I don't need a selector, right? Because I'm only going to use a nav. Let me create style. So I'm gonna show you something. Is something that we call a universal selector. So browsers by default have some margin and padding around the browser. I can showcase that here. If you notice this page, see that there is some margin, there is some padding. So what we usually do, this is a universal selector, selects everything. We usually first Get rid of that. And there, we're done. I guess this is a great opportunity to show you the power of some of the pseudo classes. I'm going to tell it, okay, apply it, but don't apply it to a UL and don't apply it to an li. Go with there. See how easy it was. Now what we're going to do is we're going to take this UL. We're first going to get rid of these bullets uh, by let's type none. Doesn't have any bullets. Now we're going to say don't have a padding and don't have a margin. We're almost ready. Problem here is that each of these li elements is taking its own row in your browser. Remember that problem? What we're going to say is, hey, inside this, each li should not be a block, but it should be a okay, two problem solved so far. And I want them to also be have a padding of let's say 20 pixels and from top and bottom and left and right 0. Okay, 4. Oh, all right. So far, so good. What I want to showcase is flex. What flex does is it's a display property. Okay, what it does, it converts your, it puts everything on a row or a column. So I say display flex. Now everything is on a row. It's stacked together. There are no horizontal margins or anything unless otherwise specified. And I want to give this UL a background of, let's say, purple is my favorite color, so I'll say purple, and a color of white, almost there. Okay. The thing that I want to give it is a font family of area. Or right. Okay. So what I want to do is I want each of my nav elements to have its own width, right? So I would say, hey, the minimum width should be 100 pixels. Now each element has its own width and it should be line set. I know I didn't go through most of these properties, but if you want to understand and learn what different CSS properties are there, that will come with practice, right? As and when you keep writing CSS, you get to know about many properties. I didn't know about list style and type for a long time. I had to use a lot of hacks to get these in order. See, so it's done. So my navigation bar is almost created, right? So, or if I want to have fun with it, I would say, let's say cursor pointer. Now when I hover over one, it is a pointer. Now, what I want to take an opportunity here is I want to talk about some pseudo classes. Okay, so pseudo classes are selectors that are selector within a selector. Okay, so let's say I have an UL and within all the LIs I'm selecting, but I only want to select those that I am currently hovering over. So there's a pseudo class for that. So let's hover. So when I say hover, I mean just change its background color to, I don't know, red. When I hover over this, you'll notice that its background color changed to red. So you really don't need JavaScript to do this, although you can, but if CSS is allowing you to, why would you go for JavaScript? Similarly, power of CSS that I'm trying to showcase here is that CSS has transitions, right? You can have animated objects. So I'm going to say transition that, hey, whenever the color of this changes to, let's say, background color, just run a kind of an animation for 200 milliseconds and make it ease out. You'll notice that when I hover over this, there is this beautiful animation, that kind of a transition that happens. That's because CSS allows you to do it. It's in within CSS to help you do things like that. So we went from an li, a ul that we had, and we completely transformed it into a very pretty navigation bar, although not very pretty, or we can do a bunch of stuff with it, with within a few CSS properties, right? So once you have a command or CSS, that's what I said. Why should you learn CSS? Because it gives you greater command over your UI, how to target it, how to navigate it, how to manipulate it. Okay. So I hope, are there any questions? If there are, please post them. Second thing that I want to show here is how do you display your elements on different screen sizes, right? So if I go back here and I, let's say, decrease the screen size, everything is messed up, right? So if I want to show this on a mobile, I am doomed. For that we use, I hope most of you know about them, we use something called a media query. Media, screen, and min max. Right? So what I'm saying to my screen is that, hey, apply these styles that I'm about to post only when the maximum width is 510 pixels. So if your width of your screen or your container viewport changes beyond 500, goes beyond 510, don't apply these styles. So the style that I want to apply is that, how do I fix this? How do I get them stacked one above the other? What I'm going to do is, that's why I use flex, because flex is really powerful. If you notice here that in this UL, we are using a display flex. I'm going to take advantage of that. I'm going to tell it, hey, whenever the screen sizes goes below this, take this flex direction and make it column. By default, it's row. It puts your elements on a row. But as soon as you go column and I go like this, once I go below 510, or what did I put here, 510, I see that all these are in a column, right? So am I below 510? I hope yes. So flex direction becomes column. Every element has been put in a column, and isn't it more convenient? I didn't use any JavaScript. I just used a media query, and now my navigation bar looks perfect on a smaller screen too. Although it can be collapsible and expandable, that's true, but it at least looks better than it was looking before, right? I hope everyone is saying right. I cannot hear anyone. So
Faisal, we have a couple of questions regarding pseudo selectors and display flex.
if we remove display flex for li, cool, that is a very good question. Let's say let's do it. Remove it for display flex for li. There is no display flex on li. Do you mean if we remove it for ul? Let me show you what will happen. Not much happened, right? But if I now decrease the width, it doesn't help me because I'm no longer using flex. So if you decrease it, you no longer have a lot of control over your UI. That's why I started with flex. When you're trying to put something on a row, when you're trying to put a bunch of elements one after the other on a row, on a couple of rows, you should, I would prefer, use flex. Flex is fairly powerful. I don't think I displayed enough power of flex here. Let me show you a quick example of flex's power. Okay, so I'm going to do justify content on space between. Okay, now everything is full width. Your whole, it takes the full width of your elements. Okay, if someone is wondering, hey, why aren't these taking full width? Because I specified minimum width. I get rid of this min width here, and I say, hey, flex grow. These are all flex properties. One, save it. I see everything looks so much better, right? That is the power of flex in CSS. And I, even if this is a small problem that I'm solving, I always try to use flex because I have more control over my UI. I will get rid of these changes that I just did, and I will keep whatever was there. I hope that answers your question, why we use the flex property here and what removing it does. If it doesn't, if you're not satisfied with the answer, please put it in the chat. All right, cool. Uh, nice. I quickly want to, so let's call it a class title. I want to show that sibling selector if I can. This is the sibling selector. Uh, it will select all the siblings. Maybe this is not the right time to use the sibling selector. I will find the time for it. So, so this was me trying to explain how do you display your websites on varying screen sizes. Uh, and I hope you guys got the answer to that. You use media queries usually. Usually you use media queries, and sometimes you use with frameworks, right? It's much more easier to build your websites for different. Like if any one of you has used Bootstrap or Tailwind, you see it's much simpler to build your websites for varying screen sizes. But it never hurts to have this tool in your quiver so that you can, in fact, just this power. Okay. All right, we can have one more session just to showcase power of flex. Sure. All right, cool. So going forward, now this is something I tried to be in the third one. I tried to be a little more practical, right? Like, hey, we are okay with using selectors. We get by, right? We get by selectors. We get by how to use, how to make get specificity working. We have so far lived without knowing box model, but when it comes to actual user stories that you get in your office, right? Some work that you get, how do we manage that? By that, I mean, how do you combine CSS with JavaScript, right? Because JavaScript is finally the main one that handles interaction, right? User interaction with your browser. You can put all your hover, all your active on your CSS, but you still need JavaScript. So I'm quickly going to showcase in uh, this very example how we can leverage CSS with JavaScript. Okay. So what we're going to do is, what if I want to collapse these, right? What if I want to have a button here where I expand and collapse these? So I'm gonna quickly create a button, very not good looking button that says dot dot dot, right? So Control S. You see this button? Please don't mind this button, and I'm gonna give it an on click that says toggle menu. This is a method that we don't have. I'm going to create. This session is not about JavaScript per se, but we are trying to get a handle on what we're going to do. First of all, this button is in the wrong place. It should be somewhere here, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add some CSS. Mind you, this button should not be displayed when I have full screen, right? When I have width of more than 500. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to say, hey, hide the button. But to do that is display none. It will only be displayed here. So I would say button display 9 o'clock. What that does is, if you see, if I increase the width, there is no button anywhere, but it is only here, right? And what I'm going to do with this button is a couple of CSS things. I'm going to give it a position of text. I'm also going to give it a left, sorry, don't ask me about these properties, we don't have the time. A right of 10px and a top of 10px. You'll notice something that this button went here where we want it, right? So all about CSS. We are not using any JavaScript so far. I'm going to create a function now that says problem menu, and what this function is going to do is it's going to look for all the allies. By the way, you any framework that you have has support for selecting elements. So I'm going to select all the allies, okay, and I'm going to do a for each on each of these lines. And I'm going to say, hey, now the problem is that this now is expanded. I want it to be in a default collapse state, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell it your, where did I specify? It's height, right? Yeah, you are the line. I'm going to tell it whichever, when you are in this screen, whichever ULLI you have should have a padding of 0 and a height of 0. And except the first one, obviously. Flag. Another cool trick, not, you guys remember, we didn't go through pseudo selectors, I'm sorry, we didn't have the time. I just want to say, whichever is the first one, that should not have this. So we're still doing CSS, by the way. This is no JavaScript. I haven't used any JavaScript. I'm just telling you. It looks like an if-else statement, right? If this is true, if this is false, do this. So CSS is quite powerful. Your question. Okay, we'll go through the questions in a bit. So what I'm going to do is, I'm going to create a class though. I'm going to create a class called expanded. And I'm going to say for expanded, the padding should be 10px and 0. And it should have a height of auto. Now, if I put this expanded on these, they will be expanded, right? So what I'm going to do is, if this element dot class list dot contains expanded el dot class list dot remove expanded, so remove this class from it and return. And then if it doesn't contain the expanded class, then do me a favor and add it. This is JavaScript, okay? So let's not go into how this, but the logic is simple. I'm not going to go into class list and query selector all. The logic is simple. If I save this, now you'll notice this. When I click this, nothing happens for some reason. Right? Right? Not save it. Hmm. Give me a second. Hmm. Okay. Okay. Something is clearly not working. See if we have an error somewhere. We don't. All right. Yes, it does have expanded added to it, but doesn't have any property within. Did I spell it incorrectly?
Faisal, are you sure the syntax is correct?
Sorry?
Syntax.
I'm pretty sure it's correct, but okay, let me try something. Change this to and yes, that worked. Sorry, my bad. I think something was wrong with the syntax here. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, no problem.
Okay, so we added a bunch of JavaScript and now our menu is working. We didn't use JavaScript to actually change the height of this or the width of this or anything for that matter. We just use JavaScript to add and remove a class. And clearly that worked. We can even make this a little more pleasant to the eye by using something that we call, uh, give me a second, all right? Just 1 second, sorry. Uh, I hope my internet doesn't get disconnected. So if it does, I'll be back in like 1 minute, all right? So bear with me. All right, so what I'm talking about, just to make this a little more pleasant, we can use what we used earlier, right? Transition. We can use this transition for all the changes. And if I do that and save it, you'll notice it's much more beautiful. And all we used was a little bit of JavaScript to change CSS and a bunch of media queries. And the greatest thing is it won't affect anything in the bigger screen, right? If we go big, nothing. There is no button, there's no expand, there's no collapse. So the thing is that it works because we combined CSS with JavaScript and now everything is much better. Any questions on this?
We do have new questions.
Oh, awesome. Why did you use square symbol while adding and removing class in JavaScript functions? Oh, yes. So this remove takes in an array of, as you see here, it takes in an array of class because you can add and remove multiple classes together. That's why I use square symbols. So I'm passing an array, not a string. So add and remove actually take multiple classes and input. That's why I use square brackets here. I face problems to center some of the content and thus use flex to center the content and justify self-align or self-align. Is it good idea to use flex so that because one downside is using multiple divs? Okay, so we don't have any problem with horizontal align, right? We can center align horizontally anything using either the margin auto hack or you can use the text align center hack, whichever one you prefer. But when it comes to vertical alignment, then flex is your best friend, right? It is a trouble. It's painful to vertically align stuff, and it's okay to use flex. I use it all the time. It's okay to write a couple of divs more. I hope that answers the question. I have another question. With Flex, can we achieve progressive web apps? So Flex is more of a tool in CSS toolkit. With it, can you achieve progressive web apps? So progressive web apps, like any app, should usually be responsive, right? It should adapt to either a bigger screen size of a laptop and to a mobile phone. So yes, Flex can be your friend there. You can use it if you're building progressive web apps.
Actually,
Another.
here, I would like to add here, Faisal.
Mhm.
Rangaswamy, if like when you are asking about PWA, so you should first understand the core concept of a progressive web app. So using Flex is all about CSS. You can use it with any kind of web app, be it a progressive web app or not. But the core purpose behind creating a progressive web app is that to give it an in like mobile app kind of feel. So that is what a progressive web app like on a very higher level is. So Flex is basically about all about CSS.
Yes.
Go ahead, Faisal.
Awesome. Thank you, Ankita. Sorry if I have covered it already. What is pseudo class, pseudo element? Pseudo class and pseudo element are brilliantly beautiful. Let me show you an example, okay? So we have this background color on hover, right? Let me show you something really good. If we get rid of this background color on hover, okay, that is fine still. Let's say I want to have alternate colors on each of my menu items, okay? So that's where one of the pseudo class comes in. So pseudo classes are they select an element and then they make the selector more specific. So what I'm going trying to do here is I want to change the color of the li, but the first li only. So I would say first child, which is a pseudo selector, and then say, hey, background color should be blue, and save. And you see the first child has a background color of blue. Similarly, now I want to do the last child should have a background color of blue. You see, the last child has a background color of blue. Another cool thing is there is an nth child. So you can specify nth child. Third child should have a color of blue, and the third child has a color of blue. It's a hack though. I only want the even number childs to have color blue. Now the second, the fourth, the sixth have it. Or I want the odd ones to have a color blue. Now first, third, and fifth have it. So this is the child select, not the child. This is the child pseudo selector. Similarly, we have a bunch, right? We used hover. This is also a pseudo class. Pseudo classes are dignified by a single colon. Now, what I want to do is inside each li, I want the first letter to be bold. Okay. So I don't know whether this will work because it's been a long time since I did this. What I'm going to do is I'm going to do first letter should be sorry text font weight should be bold. If you notice, the first letter of each li is now bold. No JavaScript. We're still not using any JavaScript to do this. We're using basic CSS. So these are called pseudo selectors. You select a pseudo class or a pseudo element. Does that answer your question, Jay? I hope it does. Awesome. Sibling selector. Yes, let's do sibling selector. How do I do sibling selector? Here. Okay, let's take an example here. Um, let's let's have another set of paragraphs. Okay. So it says hello and it has a class of, so remember what sibling selectors, how they work. And there is another P here. It says hello again. I save this. If I say hello and hello again, what I want to do is I want to set the style of the sibling of this para. Okay. So what I will do is I will do para, and then this, and then P color red. That I applied a style to a sibling here. Although I used a selector of para, this para never got this style, only its sibling got this style. So that's the sibling selector. Sometimes single colon is used, sometimes double colon is used. That's browsers doing their thing. Yes, that's true. That's true. Sometimes we use a single colon. That's sometimes double colon. But you have to understand all the web standards are guidelines which are followed by browsers. So you can, if I put two colons here, I guess it will still work, but it shouldn't. No, it won't. Sometimes it will. I guess hover will. If I go here, I don't think that was your question though. But browsers sometimes interpret these correctly. So if the question is why am I using a single colon here and why am I using a double colon here, the answer to that is that this is a pseudo class. So pseudo classes usually select a single node, okay, single element. but pseudo elements select something within that element. Okay, so as you can see here, there is no separate selector for P, right? No, not this. A and B and P don't have separate elements, but but we still can select that. That's why these are called pseudo classes, pseudo elements, sorry, and these are called pseudo classes because they usually still give you an element, a complete HTML element. I hope that answers your question. Single colon for pseudo classes, double for pseudo elements. What is the next question? There are some WebKit properties. What are those and are they browser specific? Okay. What is WebKit? So okay, let me explain how CSS properties get added and where they come from. Okay, so you see this flex, right? It wasn't around 10 years ago, or I don't know how many years ago. I haven't been programming for long. Since I haven't programmed, it has always been there. So I guess for IE 11, IE 10, IE 9, no, 9, 8, they didn't have flex because it wasn't there then. So there is something called proposals, right? So CSS is when we want to make change to CSS, right? Someone comes in and says, hey, we want another display property. It has to be available on every browser, right? So I cannot just willy-nilly go ahead and say that, hey, why can't have another display property, because every browser has to apply it. Otherwise, your code will work on one and not another. So that's why we have something called proposals. This idea is proposed, and then W3C, I'm sure W3C, it takes time to become a standard. Okay, so it goes through a bunch of stages where it's an ideation process. Then next stage, I guess, is they are considering it. Then it's an experimental one. So WebKit is something that allows you to use experimental or prop CSS items or properties that are not widely supported. Okay, so when you use WebKit, your browser leverages that technology to actually support those properties. So that's why you see sometimes when you're using, let's say, a box shadow, you see a WebKit against it. So that's to make sure that it's supported on all the browsers that this code runs on. I hope that answers the question. I never got how to use before and after pseudo selectors. Oh, okay. Huh. Let's get to those in a bit. Is this Flex same as Facebook open source project? I'm not familiar with Facebook open source project. I'm sorry. Which open source project that is? Most sense. Okay. We are getting a lot of questions. Okay. Um, let's finish the. Is it okay if we finish the presentation and we can have these after the at the end?
Sure, Faisal.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you. I didn't know we'll get so many questions, but I like it. It's awesome that we're getting so many questions.
Yeah.
All right, cool. So next is, what are some of the trends in CSS? CSS is not all about display flex, color, background color, which I have been blabbering on about for like more than 1.5 hours now. Wow. CSS is about advancements, right? There are advancements in all technologies. We started with plain old JavaScript, then we had Knockout JS. Then we had Angular, we have React, we have Vue. Everyone has forgotten about JavaScript. Many of you people wouldn't have even gotten what a query selector is, what query selector all is, because we're all into React now. We don't use query selector anymore. It's a native JavaScript API, by the way. So what are some of the things that are coming in? So some of the things I want to talk about real quick. I'm going to be very brief about all these, is that CSS is marching forward like any other technology. So for example, if you want a style guide on CSS, right, kind of a design pattern. How do I design my CSS style sheets? How do I name my styles? Do I use an underscore, a hyphen, or camel case? For those, we have style guides. And two of the most promising ones are BEM and SMAX. Okay, so these allow you to structure your style sheets whatever way you want. Okay, I have used BEM. So BEM kind of okay, how do I say? So you have a high level, top level selector. Then you have its children. Then you have it is different states of those selectors. If you want to get further into that, I would suggest you go through their documentation. But there are ways in which you can style, you can design your selectors, you can design your style sheets. On similar terms, there is SAS, SCSS. So this is a preprocessor, right? Writing CSS can get really, really difficult sometimes, right? You have to write all these, a lot of things. Your selectors can get really long, like I showed you that specificity, right? We used like three classes and an ID and an element name. So SAS enables you to write CSS in a very simpler manner. Go through its documentation if you want to know more. And it's a preprocessor that at the end of the day gets compiled into CSS, just like for TypeScript guys, right? We have TypeScript that makes writing JavaScript much more easier, but at the end of the day, everything gets compiled to JavaScript. Similarly, we have SAS for CSS. Variables. We have variables in CSS, right? So let's say I use that nav height, right? For example, I want to have a height stored in a variable that I want to use in multiple places. We have support for variables in CSS. We didn't have enough time to go through all this, but yes, I just want you to know that there are these things out there in the world. Another trend in CSS is JSS, which I absolutely do not like. But yes, for React guys and JavaScript guys here, JSS, you write CSS in JavaScript. There is CSS in React. Mm, Most importantly, anyone who has used Material UI's create styles, you can really not really CSS related, but there are ways of writing CSS, right? We have CSS in React and Grid. Grid is like it will take 3 hours to cover Grid. Grid is it's like Flex on steroids, right? Flex only allows you unidirectional layout, right? Either a row or a column. Grid covers both rows and column at the same time. So if you want to go further than this webinar, these are all the items you should be looking at. Another thing to note is that you don't always have to write each and every property yourself. You can use CSS frameworks. I would like to agree that I haven't used all these, but the ones I have used are Bootstrap and Tailwind. What they do is they write your CSS for you, then you have to reference that CSS, right? For example, you have a button, right? You wanted some style. You want it like big and you want its margin to be something, your padding to be something, color to be this. Bootstrap will write that CSS and give it a selector of a class, and then you can reference that class inside your HTML. So CSS frameworks make building layouts, building styles easier and faster. Mind you, you won't have granular control over the styles, which you can override, obviously, but these help. So if you want faster development, if you want to develop faster, it is recommended that you use a CSS framework. Any one of these. I prefer Tailwind personally, although I prefer to write my own CSS because sometimes, most of the times, I want to override the style that comes out of the box. So that is something to look at, something to take home after this session. I hope whatever we talked about was at least a bit helpful to anyone and you learned something today. And with that, that marks the end of our session, the webinar. The questions will be taken after this, obviously. This is a pun at CSS. I couldn't fit this thank you inside this box, but that is fine. All right, cool. Thanks for listening, everyone. As a suggestion, which unit of measurement makes most sense, like rem, em, view width, view height, pixels, etc.? Which one aligns best with responsive websites? Any one of these aligns well with responsive websites. So the thing is that it's it's all subjective, right? Sometimes REM makes more sense, sometimes EM makes more sense, sometimes we don't. Let me give you an example of what we did today. Okay, now if I can open that box model.css, you guys can still see my screen, I hope. If you notice that the container, the bigger container that I had, okay, let me make this, let me sing, and let's go to the, what was it, box model, and enter. Yes, box model. The container, right, the bigger container that you see, this gray box outside, is is using VH and VW. The reason it's using VH and VW because I want it to take the whole width of the screen, right? So its height is 100 VH. That means take 100% of the view height, and its width is 100 VW. Take 100% of the view width. So in this case, VW and VH make sense. Now, if you look at this deer, right, I want it to take the whole height and width of its container. So I will use percentage units. So I'm telling it, hey, whatever container you're inside, use 100% of it. But if I go into my box model, I know absolutely what I need. I need a 400 by 400 box. So make it 400 by 400, but make sure you use overrides. Let's say I go into a screen that is smaller than 400 pixels, right? So I can here specify, hey, although you can have a 400 pixel width, but your max width should be 100 VW. Shouldn't be bigger than the viewport, right? Or 90 VW, whatever you want. So it always makes sense to use any of these, but I have seen people use REM a lot for responsive designs because they tend to manipulate the REM values. So if for those of you who do not know what REM is a unit that is for width and height, which is relative to your font size of the root element. Okay, so if your root element is your body, then the font size of that is, let's say, 16px. If you say 1 rem, you mean 16px. If you say 2 rem, you mean 32 pixels. Em is relative to the nearest positioned element. What does that mean? It means that whichever nearest element has a position other than absolute, no, not absolute, other than static, it will take its font size and be relative to that. VW, I explained, pixels everyone knows. So there is Vmax also. There are a bunch. I don't want to get into this. I hope that answers the question, by the way, Arvind. Awesome. Uh, I never got to use before and after, got how to use before and after pseudo selectors. So what before and after means? Okay. So that is really good thing to use. So let's try. Where do I use that? Hmm. So what before and after does, it applies style to some element that is not visible after this current element. What does that mean? Let me try to see if I can get that working. So I'm going to say box model after, and I'm going to say height 20 pixels, a width of 100 was 400 pixels, and I'm going to say background blue. Lines to this. Oh, it did not for some reason. Um, Maybe because I'm using. Why did it not? I have no idea. So in theory, okay, let me. I really don't know why it did not apply, but for some reason it did not. In theory, oh, display block, yes. not help. Yes. Hmm.
You can try with position attribute.
Oh, okay. It somehow, yeah, CSS is crazy sometimes, but fine. So what before and after actually do is, in situations where you actually get them working, is they insert another element. They apply styles to an element that is not there, but that comes after this element. What that means is that what I was trying to do is here in this, it would by magic insert an after here. So, and style will be applied to this element. Similarly, if you use before, it will insert an element before it and apply CSS to that. So that's what before and after do. They don't apply styles to the next element, but they actually create a new element that will apply styles to. I hope that answers the question. Is this Flex same as Facebook? I still don't know what Facebook open source project. I'm sorry. Who owns CSS? No one owns CSS. So I am not 100% sure if it is W3C, World Wide Web Corporation, I guess. So which uh, not own, but they publish standards. So browsers listen to standards. For JavaScript, we have ECMA, right? We have ECMAScript standards that are proposed, and then slowly browsers adopt them. Similarly, CSS works on standards. So W3C will propose, hey, you know what? We need a new property in CSS that is, like I said, some display property, and we are proposing it for adoption. Then browsers take their own merry time to adopt to those standards and allow developers to use them. So as such, no one owns CSS. It's a community standard. And okay, another question: why are there so many elements in CSS, making it hard to master? Yes, I don't know. There are as many elements in CSS. I hope you mean properties. There are as many properties in CSS as you need, and every day I uncover new properties. So CSS keeps growing, and I am glad there are many properties, but in order to master CSS you just need to know a few basic ones, and if and when you need ones that you don't know, you will find them. So it's just that you should be able to master the ones that are actually in fact basic and that you will absolutely need. I hope that answers the question. Is SAS similar to SAS? They are the same thing, I'm sure. SCSS is the file extension that they use. I'm sure SAS and SCSS are the same thing, and SAS is the technology. It's pronounced as SAS, I guess. I guess that's it, yeah. Oh, thanks for answering, Sana. World Wide Web Consortium. Yes, thank you. Uh, Hemant. Oh, cool. Thank you. If there are more, any recommendation where we can find all CSS properties like a cheat sheet? When you find one, please give it to me too. I don't know. Uh, if there is a cheat sheet, I haven't looked for it. I guess there must be. Yeah, that's actually a cool thing to Google today. I really don't know. When you find one, please send it to me too. But
Uh,
yeah, go ahead.
you can check it out on for like beginners. You can check it out on W3 Schools, or you can also go
Yes,
to csstricks.com.
yes. So those are some of the resources that I didn't document that I should have, so that you guys can find those. But I will send some along, and Ankita can share those with everyone. Awesome. Are there any more questions?
Let's wait for a couple of minutes.
Sure, no problem. The meantime, keep looking at this beautiful deer. Um, by the way, how I got this, I wanted to, while you're writing questions and while we still have people, wanted to show a little bit of power of CSS.
Faisal, I'd like to add a couple of
Mhm.
things here.
Mhm.
Like first one would be that whenever we are styling our project, should we follow the mobile first approach because of two reasons. One is that the mobile usage has increased, like the desktop usage, and second would be that if we go by mobile first approach, we like there are lesser media queries that we have to write.
Um, yes, you could go with mobile first approach, but that varies from project to project. If it's a web application, it's usually a desktop first. But if it fits the project, yes, mobile first, and then expand from that to desktop. But what mobile first means for those, you first use, like we designed when we designed that nav bar, right? We designed it for a desktop first, then we adjusted it to work on a mobile phone. But in mobile first approach, you go the other way around. You design it for a mobile phone and then you adjust it for a desktop.
Yes, right.
So yeah, in some projects, yes.
And isn't it a kind of like a bad practice to use the element selector? Like we should rather always like try to go with the class or ID or pseudo selectors.
The reason, yes, that is true. The reason we discourage use of element selectors because they are not very specific. You guys saw the specificity chart, right? They are ranked dead last. And they are also the problem with element selectors is that they cover a lot of things, right? If I put a style on a paragraph, it will be applied to all the paragraphs, right? So yes, it is discouraged to use so it's encouraged to make your selectors as specific as possible. That's the whole point. Yes, thanks for bringing that up.
Also regarding the usage of important, so like I've also developed quite like many applications, and the maximum usage comes like maximum need comes when we are using different UI component libraries,
Yes.
wherein we are bound to use important, like.
Uh, yeah, yes and no. Yes, no, yes, because sometimes the UI library that you're using is has been built in a way, in very bad way that it is actually using an important selector within
Yes.
the library,
Yeah.
which is discouraged. When you're building a UI library, never use important. Second, if you're trying to override a style from the UI library, try to make your selectors more specific, right? The hack that I showed, right? I used the same class name twice to
Mhm.
make sure that that style is always overridden. Just find the style that's overriding your style, calculate its specificity, and then once you know its specificity, create a selector that's more specific
Mhm.
than that. But important is discouraged because maybe someone else wants to override the style that you created. They cannot. They will
Yes.
either have to make your style more specific or make their style important and make sure it always occurs after your style.
In that case, we can, couple it with one of the parent elements classes.
Exactly. Yes.
That,
Yes. You
that
can. So when we're calculating specificity, we look at everything in the selector, right? If the selector even has a parent element or anything, that also gets added to specificity. Yes. You any way you can find to increase specificity should help.
Yeah.
We have a question.
Yeah.
Any views on FOUT? I'm sorry, I'm not familiar with FOUT. Sorry about that. I will try to figure it out, but I'm not familiar. Flash of unstyled text. Still not familiar. I haven't come across it ever. I'm sorry. If you have
I'm
some
sorry too.
opinions on
I'm
it, you
sorry too.
could. Sorry.
I'm sorry too. Let's ask someone from the audience if they can help us.
Yeah, if they can, that would be awesome.
Let's
While
move
we
to the
find.
next question till then.
And does using minified CSS help in performance? It um, your file size becomes smaller if that's something that helps. But minified CSS, unlike JavaScript, is exactly the same text, no spaces or anything. In JavaScript, if you minify a file, your variable names become shorter and everything. But a minified CSS file is the same exact CSS file minus the spaces, tabs, and everything. So I'm sure it will help with performance in the way that the file size is smaller. But if you are talking about processing of the file, that will take similar amount of time.
So I think that's all.
Awesome. Thanks for listening for 2 hours. Finally, someone listened to me speaking on CSS. So
It was
thanks
worth
for
it.
Oh, awesome. Thanks a lot, guys. Thanks for listening and thanks for your questions and your participation. Till next time. Bye.
So I'd like to thank you, Faisal. It was a really interesting and very enjoying session because of the live coding, and
Awesome. Yeah.
and we also got responses from the audience as well. But I'd request you guys to fill up the form as well that we have for our feedback. So I'll quickly share that form once again. Yeah, there you go. I've shared the form. So please fill out this form. And thank you so much, everyone, for attending this session. And like, I think Sana would also agree with me when I say that we have got the best audience so far this in this session. And like we also enjoy discussing all these questions and like all the CSS things with you. So and we'll try our best to have another session with Faisal as per your
Sure.
requests. Yeah, I hope Faisal will also be like quite
Absolutely.
interested for another
Absolutely.
session.
Yes.
I hope you
We have a
enjoy
lot of
this
CSS
session.
to talk about still.
Yeah.
Yes.
So we have also shared the link for our social handles. We are there on Instagram, we are there on YouTube, where you can get the recorded version of this and more sessions that we have done so far. But particularly for this session, the video would be available sometime by Thursday. And we'll also share the presentation, the code repo with you within a couple of days. And just please do not forget to give us your valuable feedback. So this has been a very great session for us also. Now,
All right. Thanks a lot, guys.
thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Bye bye.